Five Nights at Freddy's. Is this where you want to be? I just don't get it, man. Hey, cousins, I just got done watching the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, and I gotta say, it's like 10% better than I was expecting it to be. I have a ton of nostalgia for Five Nights at Freddy's. I can still remember when the first game came out 9 years ago. Oh my god. Anytime something gets this much traction, it tends to attract a massive amount of scrutiny, which is why every second and third thing you hear about Freddy's these days is somebody talking about how stupid it is. But when it first came out, it was legitimately unique. There is no combat, no defense mechanism, just watch the cameras and close the doors so you don't get eaten alive. And always remember to click on the nose for good luck. Somehow, Scotty Boy squeezed a remarkably unsettling atmosphere out of a bunch of pre-rendered GIFs, and I don't care what anybody says, that is impressive. But let's talk movies. Video game adaptations are experiencing a pseudo-renaissance. They're not perfect, you know, we still got some stank-ass movies coming out these days, but the standards have been on a steady incline. Edge Runners, Castlevania, Arcane, that was crazy, not only paying respect to the source material, but also standing on their own merit. Then we got Detective Pikachu, the Sonic movie, and the Mario movie. These were nowhere near that level of prestige, but they were very respectful to the source material and the longtime fans, while also having their share of stupid-ass jokes to keep the kiddos from falling asleep. But there's also the Doom movie, which makes Doom 3 look fun by comparison, Halo TV show where the writers completely ignored the games and were proud of it, and then there's Uncharted, which, you know, they had Mark Wahlberg as Sully. I'm telling ya, Mark Wahlberg as Sully. What is the world coming to? Borderlands movie had test screenings that were apparently so bad that they delayed the movie by a whole year to reshoot it. Which brings us to the Freddy movie. Is it on this side of the aisle or that side of the aisle? Well, I'll say this. It's definitely better than the Borderlands movie is gonna be. But it's not quite as funny as Willy's Wonderland. Five Nights at Freddy's' primary demographics are neurodivergent high schoolers first and nostalgic 20-something fat men second. That's me if you couldn't tell. People in the first demographic love to get lost in the contradictory, ever-changing lore of the games even as they get dramatically retconned and modified. And I don't even mean that in a judgmental way, I'm just being for real. These people are so deep into this that it is staggering. For me, this shit is just like all over the place, and it's gotten to the point where it's not even scary anymore, it's just kinda confusing and frustrating. With this movie, they basically done a self-contained reimagining of the original game that started it all, while incorporating a couple of elements from future titles, which for me, that's good, because I just want to see a story unfold and absorb the atmosphere and the neat background details without getting devoured by Kingdom Hearts level of confusion that might not even apply at all when the next one comes out, okay? Because I don't care about time-traveling ball pits, Scott, I'm sorry. There are lore dumps in the movie which critics complained about, but it wasn't too distracting for me since it's relatively easy to follow within the film's context, certainly compared to the games anyway, and it pretty much starts from a clean slate, so it's kind of a win-win. The smartest move they made with this movie is that you don't have to play all the games and watch all the MatPat videos to get what's happening. Although people who have done that will be able to appreciate this movie on an additional level. By doing this, the movie will probably satisfy the hyper-analytical side of the fan base without alienating people like me who played the games when they came out and only really remember the general idea. That's the thing about game adaptations. Any adaptation worth its salt is going to be made primarily for people who love the video games in the first place, so to fully appreciate the movie, enjoying the source material that it's based on is a pretty crucial prerequisite. It would be nice if these movies could stand on their own as cinematic high art, but that's not generally the first priority. Earlier this year, the Mario movie proved that if you make a movie for the fans will love it, even if it comes at the price of the opinions of critics who probably see themselves as anti-ego because they went to college. This has always been the most prominent stumbling block for critics when it comes to game adaptations, even though the movie might be doing right by the fans. And when you make a movie like this, you have to be prepared to make that decision. Do you want to make something for the fans, or do you want to play it as safely as possible so critics don't complain, even though they'll probably get mad about something else? Video game movies assume that you're familiar enough with the source material to pick up on not only the superficial references, but also a lot of secret handshake moments as well. The things that only a true fan would pick up on, so they typically operate on another level under the critics' noses. Recently I re-watched the Mario movie and noticed all these details that I didn't before. Like there's a store called Disc-kun, which is a reference to the Famicom disk system. I'm probably like one of 20 people who picked up on that, but it made me really feel like Mario. I think hardcore Freddy fuckos are gonna feel similarly about this movie. There is a lot of stuff that they'll pick up on that I didn't because they're a lot more hardcore than I am. But even as a more casual fan, I was still able to like it as a fan. I imagine FNAF's game design and certainly its approach to storytelling is challenging to translate into a movie. Mario is straightforward, you know, make him run around and stomp Koopas and do a Mario Kart race in a Smash tournament. It's not especially complicated to fill the runtime of a movie with that. The gameplay of Five Nights at Frankie's is sitting in a chair, watching cameras and closing 2 doors. How do you do that for a 2-hour movie? Well, you don't. The strength in the game was subtext and background details, reading newspaper clippings on the walls giving you details about the missing children and the weird odors coming from the suits. Phone guardman, he'd call you up every night and he would never specify anything outright but would rather prompt the player indirectly to read between the lines and go, okay, there's some shit going on here.
When we get it all sorted out, we may move into the day show. This just became available.
It's not as easy to do that in a movie, especially one that kids are going to be watching, but the approach they used was relatively uninvasive and effective, at least I think. Even though it does take time to explain things, I feel like it stops just before it starts over-explaining them, you know what I mean? I don't expect everyone to agree, but the lore dumps weren't especially distracting for me. I imagine the biggest challenge with writing the movie, though, was making Mike Schmidt into a character. The first game takes the Master Chief approach, where it doesn't spend a lot of time explaining who this guy is. It's like, he's Mike, he's the guy who does the, you know the thing. Of course, the lore kind of opened his character up to interpretation. I remember the very first game theory suggested that he was actually the killer the whole time and just, you know what, who gives a shit. But on the surface, Mike is a mystery man without a face and is primarily a conduit for the player. For the kind of movie this is, it's harder to open it up to interpretations and theories like that because of how much more straightforward that it has to be. The movie is very clear about who this guy is and why he's here. He's desperate. He can't keep a job due to his erratic behavior. He needs to demonstrate that he's capable of taking care of his little sister, who he is extremely protective of, probably because he can't escape the guilt of letting his little brother out of his sight for 2 seconds as a kid, which was long enough for him to be abducted, and also, he somehow believes the restaurant is connected to his disappearance. All of this is explained outright, and for the kind of movie this is trying to be, that's fine. While a deeply psychological and internalized Kubrick approach to Five Nights at Freddy's is the kind of movie that I would like to see, I don't think it would be tangible enough to work in the context of a PG-13 kids-approved horror movie, and it would be much harder to facilitate the fan service that way. The fan base enjoys the creepy stuff, but they also love the actual characters, so they have to prioritize respect for them over everything else, which is probably why the movie makes a huge point of humanizing the animatronics, depicting them as kinda sweet and misunderstood, which, considering they were always supposed to be possessed by the spirits of murdered children, it makes a lot of sense for them to be heavy-handed about that point. That's the biggest difference between this movie and the games, is how a lot of the subtext kinda just became the text. Even when you beat the original game, there aren't really any answers or a solution. If anything, it's an anti-solution because you get fired. Really? After all that shit? Good luck finding somebody else. Very few of the questions are answered outright, which allowed it to remain scary because there was no way to fully understand it, and you always fear what you don't understand. The loss of mystery in the movie does unfortunately diminish its efficacy as a horror film. The movie chose to be very upfront about its plot, and the conclusion is largely unambiguous, and it's a 90% happy ending, and while that's not an objectively bad thing, It does lose that mystique that the first game had, and that is the most unfortunate part of the movie to me. In terms of scare factor, you know what I mean? It'll probably scare children who make up a good portion of the audience, but don't go into this expecting to shit your ass and stay up at night. Critics were mad that there wasn't a lot of blood and gore in this PG-13 film. I guess they missed the part where Freddy chomped a bitch in half, which is even more than I was expecting. I'm more disappointed that they didn't say fuck in the movie. With a PG-13 movie, you can say that word once, but they didn't. This was a major missed opportunity.
Too fucking bad.
As I said before, the original game's strength was in its subtlety. There really wasn't a lot of blood and gore to begin with, so to add it into the movie would be a little superfluous, but I would have liked it to be a little more scary. I think the fans are more attached to the actual story than they are to getting spooked, so this is not completely unexpected to me. But that's enough bitching. Now what's the coolest part of the movie? Easily the practical effects. The coolest thing about this movie is how they brought to life the original location, complete with its original band of freaky robo-bitches. I was concerned that they wouldn't do justice to the characters, like they make some wonky looking CG or some odd shit, but no. They actually brought in Jim Henson's Creature Shop to do the animatronics, and visually, wow, just wow. This is exactly how you would expect these characters to look in real life. They did not dick around with this. I don't have a single bad thing to say about it. It's immaculate. It's not just the way they look, it's the way they move. There's a real weight to them, a legitimate heftiness if you know what I'm saying. They look like they could kill you if they were real, which is exactly how they should look. If the movie gets a sequel, definitely bring these guys back to work the animatronics because they just slammed it out of the stratosphere. They are very clearly aware that the fans would hold it to the most discriminating standard. I also like the soundtrack. It's not John Williams, but I think it really captured what the movie was going for. There's a whimsy to it that still retains its scary undertones, which is exactly what the series has always been. Spooky, but whimsical. One thing I didn't expect was for them to use the Living Tombstone song from 9 years ago, but I guess I should have expected it because the online community, the fans, are such a massive part of this series, and I gotta admit, it did get me a little nostalgic. I also didn't expect the side characters to be anywhere near as memorable as they were, like the lawyer guy whose entire purpose as a character is to feel completely out of place among these psychopathic weirdos. The scene at the diner, they're all cracking up some batshit crazy scheme to break into Freddy's and ruin what little reputation Mike has left, and this guy's just sitting here like, man, I shouldn't be here. Matthew Lillard is brilliant. People my age will never not see him as Shaggy, but for a lot of FNAF fans, that was before their time, and even for me, it wasn't too distracting because it turns out that he's just a good actor. Yeah. Some people were upset that there wasn't a Markiplier cameo.
I am the king of Five Nights at Freddy's!
But there was a Theory Man cameo where he plays a waiter at Denny's and they gave him the most annoying dialogue I have ever heard. I am convinced the writers had it out for him. They deliberately did him dirty with that dialogue. Without MatPat's theories, FNAF probably doesn't exist in the capacity that it does today, so it was a good thing to bring him in. They definitely made the right move by not making him a major character because that would have been too distracting, and I imagine if Markiplier was in the movie, I'd feel the same way about him. My expectations for this movie were not particularly high, and exceeding those room temperature expectations was no Herculean task at all. But they did do it, and I'm happy they did. If you are a tier 3 Freddy fucko, then you will love this movie. This will be your Citizen Kane, this will be your Fight Club, this will be your American Psyduck. But if you're not a Freddyman, I would say this is a very take it or leave it situation. This is first and foremost a movie for the fans, and it is not designed to stand up to tremendous scrutiny on its own. Not that it's offensively bad or anything, it's just not particularly groundbreaking. One way or another, I'm happy to see another respectful and faithful video game adaptation that does justice to its source material, and I'm hoping that this will help wake up the money men and yield a whole lot more faithful adaptations. Maybe we can get a Ghibli-style Pikmin movie, or a Star Fox movie, where they say fuck.